Bonjour à tous, bienvenue.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Strasbourg for the European Parliament for the opening ceremony on the Conference of the Future of Europe. It's over to you, European citizens, to take your future in your hands, and you will be the actors across Europe in finding solutions which can be developed over the 2021-2022.
Welcome on this 9th of May, this Corona-Proof Europe Day, the day that more than 70 years ago marked the beginning of the idea of a European Union with the Schuman Declaration, the day that symbolizes Europe's striving for peace and unity. It's a work that's still in progress. Like Rome, Europe was and is not built in one day.
L'Europe ne se fera pas d'un coup.
Europe is not built in a day. This is what Schuman himself said, and today we're going to prove this to you.
L'Europe ne se fera pas d'un coup.
What you just saw was a fast-forward run through Europe's history and a 360 degrees look at the many faces, experiences and realities that make up the European Union. It's been and still is, in a way, a story of hardships and dreams, of setbacks and achievements.
Alors nous nous retrouvons
Today, Europe Day, the 9th of May. We are here in the seat of the European Parliament here in Strasbourg, France. We are in the very hemicycle where the MEPs usually sit with some very important guests. We have Emmanuel Macron, the French President, the President of this Parliament, David Sassoli, Prime Minister António Costa from Portugal, which currently has the presidency of the European Council. We also have the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. We also have the three presidents of the Executive Board of the Conference on the Future of Europe. We also have with us 27 Erasmus students, and you can see on your screens the 27 Ministers of European Affairs and 500 citizens who are also here with us. There's a lot of goodwill to start this conference. There'll be a series of debates and also discussions led by citizens and should allow everyone to share their ideas and to build our common future together. This is done via a digital platform in 24 languages.
Indeed, Caroline, but for this project to succeed, it needs you, Europeans, to breathe life and impact into it, to really make it a tool for a more democratic European Union. COVID laid bare weaknesses of and in the EU these past few years or months at least, but it also highlighted some strengths and room for improvements. The pandemic may well inspire a wide range of suggestions for change. Today, the political leaders of the EU are present here, and they're here to tell you, to explain why and how they started this conference, or conversation if you like, and what it should lead to.
Et nous commençons par...
We will begin by welcoming President Macron. I'm very pleased, I'm sure, that we are here in the seat of the European Parliament, which has not been used by the MEPs for 12 months now. Mr. President, you have the floor to open the ceremony, and maybe you could also give us your view on the future of Europe.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President of the European Parliament, Madam President of the European Commission, Prime Minister, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, Madam Vice President of the European Commission, ladies and gentlemen, MEPs, ladies and gentlemen, both in the room today and from afar through remote conferencing. I'm quite a happy man to see you, that we can gather once again together today during this Europe Day. I'm very pleased that we're celebrating it with a shared political commitment orchestrated by what will become our universal language. The artists are willing to play their part. And here we are gathered in Strasbourg on the 9th of May, which tells us a great deal about who we are, how we're going to work to shape ourselves after the 70 years of a common experience and looking at the founding moments in our archives. Strasbourg is the city of reconciliation, after all. It is the living symbol of this Europe that said no to war, to build peace, to replace occupation with cooperation, to lift the worries looking towards the borders, to breathe new confidence and friendship into European souls. That's what Strasbourg is all about. Strasbourg, the capital of Europe, is a symbol. And we're not building an imaginary Europe, we're building this feeling of belonging. Strasbourg is the home to what it is in its democratic efforts of outreach, and not just looking to the past, but inspired by it to build the future. This is where the European heart beats. The Council of Europe, the European Parliament, the Parliament that unites us, not a weakness, but certainly it allows us to show our strength and to affirm our identity. So, President David, thank you for being here today with this firm decision to start with the European Parliament's work once again in Strasbourg as soon as possible. We discussed this at great length before. This is a founding chronic of time that we just witnessed together, and this should lead us, it should inspire us to basically grow accustomed to the current situation, but to overcome the weaknesses, but to remain permanently optimistic and driven. That is our duty, and we need to breathe a new democratic life into our institutions and to build that confidence that we have in Europe amongst our citizens. We are here in an unprecedented pandemic that has affected us for more than a year worldwide, but most particularly in Europe. When these huge crises fall upon us, and we've had many such occurrences in the past, there are always very deep-seated doubts and national instincts that start to make themselves comfortable. We've seen today that some people are challenging what we are about, who we are, and just forgetting everything that we've built up. That's what's at stake today. That's the risk, that is to just give up out of a sense of just not knowing what to do rather than to build on what we've done. And we can already hear people attack Europe, accuse it through this spirit of defeatism. Look at this Europe, Europe missed the boat. And I say it's quite the opposite. In this crisis, it is a European model that really came into its own. And I think we've seen the pathways forward, given the challenges before us. This model is our DNA, our deep identity. I want, basically, in inaugurating this conference, although we've talked about the decades ahead, I wanted to recall that if together we managed to resist in the face of this, it's because for 70 years now we have built together, which didn't just happen, it wouldn't have just have happened by itself, without real effort, through our model of social protection, a Europe characterized by solidarity. It is the result of a model that is productive and social, a Europe of competitiveness, of competition, of economic strength, but it is always thought in terms of solidarity from the word go. Solidarity towards the regions, towards the local communities, and in terms of ambitious policies. Nowhere else in the world do we have so much importance attached to life, and we're happy with that. And on a continent, when lives are sacrificed in order to preserve the economy, sometimes that wasn't possible. We made that choice in Europe to show our solidarity, a humanitarian face. And we accompanied everybody along the way with our healthcare system, which we funded together. We helped our businessmen, our independent workers, industrialists, and all sectors, the most hardly hit. And we have every reason to be proud of what we've done. Would it just have happened? The poor countries, of course, very strongly hit. Even the other continents trying to act were forced to sacrifice lives, quite simply, to keep the economy going. Otherwise, the crisis would have made more victims. Other countries have sacrificed many of their economic models. They don't have the same solidarity model. I think of our friends, our allies in America. Our model is our strength, and we've managed to resist together. We've managed to come up with a rapid response together, given the crisis that started 10 years ago, an immediate reaction, a rapid budgetary response with the European sponsor of July last year. And together, we built a vaccination campaign. We put it together, we made it happen, and I would like to thank the President of the Commission. We did not have that community competence at the beginning of this crisis. We got our act together, we managed to decide, to gain pace, to gain momentum, and yes, European cooperation did save lives and will continue to do so. That's our strength. And yes, this model of solidarity is the one that from the very beginning of the crisis has allowed us to rekindle our faith in solidarity through the initiatives with our African partners, with vaccine solidarity, with our Balkan neighbors, and continuing to build on that solidarity. We're happy, I'm pleased that with our American allies, they're joining us now on this path to help us in our endeavors, to open up, to export doses, the transfer of technology, to produce more vaccines, and particularly to send it to all who need it. This cooperation, this spirit of solidarity is bigger than any of us. It is what leads us with our neighbors, and particularly our African neighbors, to build the decades ahead of us. Our second major strength, once again, became clear during this crisis, and I don't think you can possibly say it enough. It's democracy, which is part of our identity. And despite it all, insidiously, more and more, it is being called into question. People are wondering how effective it is. I hear, like you do, the voices of those who are in authoritarian regimes. They haven't been very effective in this crisis. They haven't managed too well. Basically, it's what our citizens expect of us. And of course, if we forget the real consequences of the authoritarian regimes, the lack of freedom, more and more political detainment, university professors being stifled. It's not just academic. They've forgotten that they are part of history, those that chose to embark on that path. But we have every reason to be happy to carry on, to openly discuss and to conduct in our democracy everywhere in Europe this democratic debate, the criticism, challenging, the fights, quarrels, disagreements is what defines us, and it's also what makes us more effective. It allows us to express criticism democratically. This model, which is productive and shows solidarity, part of our European ID, being attached to protecting the environment and the climate, and we maintain that ambition during the crisis through the Green Deal and through the digital platforms and protection of privacy, respecting the rights and freedoms. Strasbourg is a place of many symbols because of the battles that we have waged during the pandemic. It is a model based on an economic and social system that has shown that it is resilient in times of crisis. And yesterday and the day before in Porto, we saw that to adapt to the transition to the digital era, and with genuine protection for our workers, allowing us to grow, to create jobs, which goes hand in hand with fighting exclusion, poverty, and promoting gender equality, the respect of fundamental rights of all workers in all value chains. That is our model. And I want to recall that before we start thinking about the 10 years ahead of us. Never can we allow it to become vulnerable. It is a treasure that we have earned, that we have built over time. In this crisis, it does show some cracks of weakness, and Europe has to be able to do things. And our aspirations that we're entitled to should be based on what the causes of the crisis were. First of all, we understood the message. It is solidarity that goes hand in hand with sovereignty. You cannot have a model based on solidarity. You cannot be helping those who are the weakest in our society if we don't produce, if we don't decide to defend the sovereignty of our space. We were divided at the beginning for some time when it came to purchasing masks, shutting our borders at times. Even for the recovery, we got divided whenever we were dependent. Each and every time we were up against a risk in the response when it wasn't in our hands. We managed to ensure that sovereignty was the ability to produce today and tomorrow, and I don't think that we will have a Europe that's up to its date in history unless we realize that in the 1980s, 90s, and in the 2000s, we were a large consumer market, and we are still today. And we need to once again become producers. We need to become once again a community of major scientists, large entrepreneurs, major artists, industrialists, because production, creating on our territory is guaranteeing our sovereignty, protecting our model and our values. And it is this sovereignty, this cultural, academic, industrial, research sovereignty is crucial. Building it is sometimes meaning winning back things that we allowed to slip through our fingers, and sometimes strategically coming up with a response by seeking alliances, European industrial alliances, as we've started. Once again, with hydrogen, semiconductors, the cloud, managing what we've done in a matter of times to become the #1 vaccine producer worldwide. But we need to go far further, because each and every time there's dependence on the external world, Europe is divided. We also learned during this crisis a second lesson. When Europe has the ability and the resilience to act, you do once you are driven by the political motivation. As of March 2020, the European Central Bank was up to the task and suspended the budgetary and competition rules, which allowed us to state our desire to get the economy going again. But in many areas, the European Union doesn't have the same competence or the same wherewithal. And sometimes it really has very little to work with in the field of health, and that's still the case today. This weakness explained the difficulties in coordination. Therefore, We need to learn the lessons. Given this major shock of the pandemic, we need to beef up our common capacity, because it is at the European level that we'll come up with the relevant response. And finally, we've noted oftentimes that Europe wasn't moving forward quickly enough, was lacking ambition. In this very hemicycle, I stated my conviction that in dealing with authoritarian regimes, the only valid response is the authority of democracy, and you can only get that if you are effective and quick. Our European democracy is one of compromise, of striking a balance, and that's something that we need to protect like a treasure, because it avoids any hegemony. It is also a weakness when we are strangled in our own procedures. There is no fatality in the procedures, but once again, we need to find an effective way forward with ambition to get through the crises and to avoid not taking decisions. We need to be stronger. Looking at the figures of our program, our research investment program on industrial projects for the future, if you compare what we've done with the US or China, we're not yet where we need to be up to our ambition. And too many months have taken to finally get the investment decisions that are 5 or 10 times lower compared to our US counterparts. In other terms, I'm pleased that the United States of America looks to Europe to become more of a society of solidarity, and I hope in my deepest of hearts that in Europe we will once again find faith in the future and act swiftly for massive investments, acting on these investments. And therefore, it is our duty to pull this off, to act more quickly, and to find the relevant subjects to gain that momentum. This crisis has affected us in our most intimate parts of life, our private lives, imposed limits on our travel at the borders. I see many young Europeans' faces. I see artists who have suffered a great deal during this crisis because they have had their concert rooms taken away from them, their contact with the public stripped away from them. And I think that at this conference it is essential we need to find the path towards the future once again, and that is what this conference on the future of Europe is all about, to find a way to shape democracy collectively and to learn the lessons, and I haven't even covered all of them, but also to find the ways and means once again to find a long-term outlook, a real, genuine outlook based on shared objectives. Our friends that are most involved, I would like to thank them at this time, but there will be a year of a debate where we'll meet one another, the institutions, the parliament, the social partners, and we know how very much they want to be part of this discussion. The thinking groups of all citizens, European groups at the local level, the online platforms available in all languages, a citizens panel. It will be an unprecedented exercise to listen to the entire continent and to think of what we want our future to look like. From the beginning, in autumn, we had the citizens' debate in each region, and I asked the heads of government to get involved. We need to make a collective commitment today, as soon as March of 2022. When we look at all of the contributions, put it all together, sum it all up, we political decision makers and the various member states, the European Parliament, the European Commission, will have to take that into account and inform Europe. And picking up on what we did in the first half of 2022 in the presidency, organizing a conference that we hope will continue with this, and we need everybody to be on board with a full commitment. This conference is something we owe to our young people. We ask them to make the hardest sacrifice during this crisis, after all, and it is for them that we will build this new Europe. When I spoke of all these values in our success, it's because we have the privilege of having the years of struggle, sometimes dangerous and horrible struggle over the years. And for our young people, once again, we need to have a conference where they have their rightful place. Today, there is a broad online consultation process underway with 50,000 young people telling us what their priorities are, what their aspirations are, their priorities, their dreams. And as of this autumn, we'll take a new youth initiative, once again, in a very real sense, to support students to find their way back to the classrooms and to help those who have launched on building a new business, each and every one to have such a new experience in another country, thanks to the European Commission, the European Investment Bank, through national means, additional relaunch measures. That's how we're going to do it, and on the substance, you will have to write that chapter in the history books. I hope that this conference will sound off the time of major projects, major ambitions, major dreams. What do we want Europe to look like in 10, 15 years? What borders will it have? What new institutions? What major cultural projects will we launch together? How can we make this Europe the leader of reduction of emissions? And I hope carbon neutrality achieved even more quickly. How can we build this Europe of education, of research, making it even stronger? The new borders in space, in our oceans. How can we manage, basically, to write our new legends for ourselves? A French poet who's been often overlooked, Patrice Latour-Dupin, said it. All countries that have lost their legends will be condemned to die of the cold, and that will apply to our Europe as well. If we lose sight of our legends, we will die of cold. We have our legends, and we need to go through them quickly. We need to write new legends. It is up to us. It is up to you. Thank you, and I'm counting on you.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. And while we are getting the stage ready for the Karski Quartet, let us take the opportunity to explain to you how you can participate in the conference that we just heard about. To begin with, you can submit your ideas for change, your worries, your questions on our website, futureeu.europa.eu.
Alors, il y a aussi des...
There are also events which will be organised in all member states in your regions, either by digital means or otherwise. There will be panels which represent different areas and different parts of society. There will be different topics which will be taken into account, and then these will be fed back into the plenary conference in the EU institutions. But there's also social partners and obviously all Europeans.
It's getting readier and readier for the Karski Quartet. They're up next. Let me tell you a little bit about them. They're a multinational quartet originating in Belgium. They're multinational because it's one Belgian and 3 Polish musicians working together in the universal language that music is. They took their name from Jan Karski. He's a legendary figure in the resistance, or he was a legendary figure in the resistance during the Second World War. And the quartet is particularly inspired by Karski's profound compassion and uncompromising attitude.
Alors, ils vont nous
They will be playing for us the number one Opus 76 of Joseph Haydn. It was described at the time as full of innovation and full of fire, innovative. Now you soon will be able to judge for yourselves if that is still true. We'll allow our musicians, our quartet, to take their places, and whenever you're ready.
Bravo, bravo au quartet.
Bravo to the Karski Quartet, and now in his very own hemicycle in the capital of the Alsace. I think this is a capital which is very close to your heart. I think you appreciate local cuisine. I think that's one reason, but other reasons as well. David Sassoli, you are the President of the European Parliament. You are a fervent defender of the role of this conference. You're a former journalist in Italy. You've always tried to listen to the people, and we need to have this discussion with this house, house which is elected by direct democracy. We need to invest in the future. You are calling on European citizens to mobilise. What message would you like to give to them?
Buongiorno a tutti.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. President Macron, President von der Leyen, Prime Minister Costa, Ministers of Foreign Affairs, colleagues, citizens, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome all of you here to the European Parliament for the opening ceremony of the Conference on the Future of Europe, which is being held on Europe Day. It was important for this major democratic exercise to be launched here in the hemicycle of the home of European citizens here in Strasbourg, the seat of our institution, from which we've been absent for so many months as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. We trust and hope that the Parliament will very soon be able to return its plenary sessions here in Strasbourg. I'd like to thank President Macron for his presence and for his involvement in this important issue. And I'd also like to thank the joint presidents of the conference, President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Costa. This hybrid opening ceremony, and I'd like to welcome all European citizens who are connected here today from our member states. I'd like to thank the Ministers of European Affairs, the leaders of political groups, and the High Representative for Foreign and Security Affairs. There are many, many people connected with us today, and unfortunately we can't all be physically in this room as a result of the pandemic. And over the last months we've seen a lot of pain among our citizens, our families, our workers, as a result of COVID. At the start of this parliamentary term, as you're aware, the Conference on the Future of Europe was a priority for the European Parliament. We requested it, and it's being launched today. Yes, there has been a delay, but an awful lot has happened during recent months. Even before the pandemic, the Parliament firmly believed in the importance of having an event such as this. Today, after 15 months of crisis, it's very clear to us what has worked and what hasn't worked. It's much clearer to us where the European Union is strong and what we can be proud of. But we're also aware of where we're weak and what we could improve. The lessons we've learnt from COVID are important ones for all of us, and they're also important for the functioning of the European Union. During the last 15 months, we've had the same institutions and the same individuals in place, and yet some things haven't worked and some have. When Europe is aware of its responsibilities, it responds effectively, rapidly, coherently. But when the European Union finds itself in a difficult situation, then sometimes it finds itself in difficulties. We want to improve the way in which we function, and we want to base ourselves on our values and principles to do that, because we firmly believe that democracy is stronger than authoritarianism and provides more effective responses. It respects individuals, communities, and member states. And that's why we need to get down to work, as of today, to ensure that we function in a more consistent manner. Europe needs to have a clear remit, clear competences in many areas in which member states alone would be marginalised and would simply struggle. We need to think of ourselves. We need to think of democracy. We need to make it capable of taking rapid decisions, because our citizens want democracy to respond to their needs. But if democracy has to decide unanimously, if there can be vetoes, how can the European Union respond effectively? We need to work on ourselves. Because we want to leave our younger generations not only the weight of the crisis, but pride in a European Union which can be a reference point in a world where the challenge of authoritarianism is a major one. And we see that on the international stage at this time. This year has been a year of lessons learned. And we shouldn't simply stash them away in a drawer somewhere. We need to look at them and understand how and where we can improve. This ceremony is launching this process, and we have a need to move forward with this exercise of this unprecedented exercise in democracy. Institutions and citizens, institutions and civil society, European institutions and national institutions all need to work together. Because another lesson in the crisis is that we are all part of the same whole. The European Union isn't only Brussels, it's national parliaments, it's national governments, regions as well, which are so important in the lives of our countries. Everyone needs to feel involved in this process, and we want to work with them. We want this conference will discuss the way we are without taboos. We want clear, pragmatic suggestions as to how we can improve. The Parliament obviously intends to play its role in this conference as the representatives of our citizens, our 740 5 members of the European Parliament feel a major responsibility in ensuring that this exercise will be a success. They will be reaching out to citizens and to voters who've placed their faith in this institution. A year and a half ago, the temptation was to undermine the European Union in the elections. But citizens were aware that joint policy, European policy, and a spirit of solidarity would enable us to overcome major difficulties. For the European Parliament, we need clear proposals at the end of this procedure based on recommendations made by citizens and debates in the plenary assembly. But the most important thing is that these suggestions be followed by action. These proposals will have to be a compass to guide our work during the coming decade. And by signing the joint declaration, our institutions committed themselves along those lines. Without wishing to prejudice the results of these debates, the conference will be a space for discussion in which we'll inevitably have to tackle the issue of European health, as President Macron said, and as the Parliament has already said. We need a European policy on human health as a result of the pandemic. If we don't achieve that, it would be a defeat, and it would mean exposing ourselves to new crises and new difficulties. We've just held the Porto Summit, and I believe that the social dimension will also be at the heart of the discussions during this conference. At the end of this pandemic, European solidarity will be more necessary than ever, so that we can together tackle the social and economic consequences of the crisis. Dear friends, make no mistake. Without increased social cohesion, the identity of our societies and the essence of our democracies would be under threat. I also believe that the time has come to reflect on the functioning and identity of the European Parliament. As I said earlier, our democratic systems constantly need to adapt to the context in which we live, because democracy is built on a daily basis. We also know that democracy is fragile. And let me remind you all of the moment at the start of this year when all of us were looking to Washington, where there was an effort to attack the American Congress. The Parliament is the guarantor of democratic values in the European decision-making process. And that's something that we particularly need to reflect on. Our institution has 705 members, and we represent the pluralism that exists in our democracies, in our democratic lives in Europe. I think, therefore, that we have to reflect on how we can boost the central role of the European Parliament, particularly with regard to its powers of initiative. As is the case for every national parliament, the right of initiative should be given to the European Parliament, so that our institution can make proposals to the Commission and to the Council, and not just receive their proposals. This would help to give the Parliament increased capacities and would improve our democracy. We also need to increase the transparency of elections and enable citizens to indicate their preference for President of the Commission. I hope that the conference will also deal with the lead candidate issue, because I firmly believe that this will contribute to citizens' need to be more involved. In the same way, it's crucial to look at the issue of unanimity in the Council, as I said earlier. We see that in the world there are geopolitical players who attack us and take advantage of our divisions to weaken us. This contributes to citizens' distrust, and that's something that we have to fight, because a democracy that can't respond rapidly is a democracy that can easily be attacked. There are many proposals, many things to think about. Every institution puts forward its own priorities, and citizens need to help us to understand the spirit of the times, which requires more Europe. All these reflections, and those that emerge from our citizens, may well need an update of our treaties, and I would ask everyone, if that's the case, to be brave, to be generous. There should be no taboos, and we shouldn't be afraid. And it's in that spirit that we will hold these discussions, so that we can find the responses that our societies require of us. Personally, I firmly believe that the awareness of our unity and a common destiny is shared by the majority of our citizens now more than ever, because many people have become aware that without Europe's initiatives, without a European policy, all our countries, all our communities and our citizens would be weaker. Together, let's build a stronger, more resilient and more democratic and more united Europe. That's the message that we need to send out from here in Strasbourg today, the capital of the European Union. And I think this is the message that can push our citizens to give us the responses we need. Thank you.
Grazie mille, Presidente. Europe is a multifaceted and polyphonic continent. And what better way to illustrate that than EuropaVox? EuropaVox was born 15 years ago with two main goals in mind. First, to help European music talents to travel and spread their songs all over the continent, and to help music lovers to discover great new artists.
Et puis il faut dire Annelise.
We should also say that the 9th of May, on Europe Day, there's always a concert. There'll be a concert on at 7 o'clock this evening online. This is the second edition of Music Europe Day. 12 European artists who are passionate about music, and you can watch the concert. It's available to everyone on their Facebook page. It brings together European people and breaks down walls, and these talented young people have something to say about the culture in Europe, and now we listen to their music.
Le grand intérêt de l'Europe, c'est d'être une voix qui a un peu de portée dans le monde d'aujourd'hui.
C'est quand même une porte à construire quelque chose, à rencontrer plein de gens différents.
The dream Europe is happening, I guess.
It's also movement. Yeah, it's constant movement. It's constant being alive as European.
C'est la force de l'Europe, c'est justement d'avoir plusieurs communautés, d'avoir ouvert les frontières, et c'est ça qui fait la force et la richesse de l'Europe.
Il faut vraiment qu'on soit soudés et connectés entre nous. C'est ça qui va faire encore plus grandir l'Europe, et pas que, le monde entier.
I would love Europe to be even more diverse and to be respectful about this diversity.
In terms of culture and stuff, I mean, one of my favorite things about Europe in general is this kind of, you know, the idea that everybody brings their own thing into an area, and I'd love to see more and more of that, basically kind of the cultures kind of mixing together and introducing people into new stuff all the way.
O nosso próximo
Our next speaker has just arrived from the city of Porto. Yesterday he chaired a social summit, a European Social Summit. Today we have António Costa, welcome, Prime Minister of Portugal, and is here to speak to us about this summit, this invitation to European citizens to be involved in discussions about how we want to organise the Union and how we want to live together in Europe in the future.
Rotating presidency of the EU, that this joint initiative by the European Parliament, the European Commission and the European Council takes flight. It's quite a feat to accomplish, to get all these institutions working together with the citizens. Primeiro-Ministro Costa.
Prime Minister Costa, you have the floor.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. President of the French Republic, President of the European Parliament, President of the European Commission, European citizens, it's a pleasure to be here today with President David Sassoli and Ursula von der Leyen in the official opening of the Conference on the Future of Europe. European people across our countries are facing up to the pandemic. There have been horrific consequences, both social and economic. This official launch of the Conference on the Future of Europe is a message of confidence in the future that we want to convey to all citizens of Europe. Why are we having this Conference on the Future of Europe? The answer, and it may seem strange to you, was given by one of the great European poets of the 16th century, Louis de Comminges, in one of his most famous poems. He said, "Times change, desires change, people change, confidence change. Everything, the whole world is made up of changes. We always need to develop new qualities." So let's start with the beginning. Times change, desires change. 71 years now. 71 years have passed since the Schuman Declaration, which we celebrate on the 9th of May as Europe Day. Throughout these 71 years, our will, our desire has changed Europe. For a long time now, we have been more than the 6 countries who wanted to set up a steel and coal community. The EU has been growing. Our desire has been common to do more. We've been extending the EU to new accessions and new and more diversity. This is a success story that we can be proud of. Now, everything seems clear, obvious. Even Brexit seemed irreversible. History is not linear, though. Whenever we deepen or expand the EU, has led to difficult choices and meant that we needed to find compromise. We needed a lot of persistence and we needed to be creative. We didn't always move forward together or at the same time. With Schengen and the Euro clearly illustrate, we still haven't fully concluded all of the steps that we've already given, both with Schengen and Euro shows quite clearly. We should not forget this. There is a desire to move forward, but we should not allow problems to exist which can undermine our cohesion. We need to address the key issues. If we want to be successful, and we have to be successful, we cannot avoid the difficult issues. Today there are a range of debates ongoing about what the EU should be. These debates are not limited to certain states and moving states, but they are dividing societies in many of our member states. The EU has come forward a long way, but we're still far away from where we need to be. We are above all a community of fundamental values, or are we just an economic space which has added value with its integration? How do we judge these common values? How do we ensure that they are in line with national requirements as well? How do we link national interests with solidarity, for example? How do we share resources? Or how do we do this in terms of managing migration? The Conference on the Future of Europe is an opportunity to address these issues frankly and openly. We don't all think the way that we used to think. New times require new ways of working. Our desire changes over times, and we want more things. The Lisbon Treaty was careful. It provided for the necessary flexibility via passerelle clauses and also reinforced cooperation mechanisms, so that we didn't have to face up a dramatic problems if there were different opinions. Then it allowed for certain people, certain member states, to do more or to do things more quickly. We have common values that are not relative. For example, the rule of law, gender equality. But there are elsewhere different matrices which are open to everything. We want to see full participation on basis of objective criteria. This will allow us to build the future with necessary unity and clearly diversity. This conference, therefore, should focus on all the different desires and wills of all the citizens in Europe and not on negotiations between countries. This is a conference for citizens, by citizens and for citizens. Now let's move on to the second verse of it says, beings change and trust change. The most recent Eurobarometer report is very clear. It says that the EU's response to the COVID crisis has placed the European Union at the highest level in relation to the amount of trust that people have in it. Well done, Ursula. This time, the success of the EU in looking after its citizens has been very clear. We have seen that Europeans did not feel abandoned. They were all considered as equal. We can draw conclusions from this. Firstly, European citizens recognise the added value of EU action. Secondly, we can say that European citizens want the EU to focus their efforts on a direct response to specific problems that citizens face. Over the past 10 years, a huge number of major topics are continually quoted as sources of concern. Defence of freedom against the terrorist threat, the economic and social situation, and climate change. Migration as well is an issue that is of concern to people. It is not surprising, therefore, that over the past 12 months, health has also come a major concern for Europe's citizens. Another very important point, 9 out of 10 Europeans want a social Europe. If we want Europe to have a future, then Europe needs to build on its strengths. It needs to build on the strength of its citizenry. We need more than just certain parts. We need to ensure vast citizen participation. This is a key point. The Conference on the Future of Europe should focus on the women and men of Europe. What is troubling these people? What is making them dream? This should not be an exercise which is based in Brussels. It should be member states, regions, municipalities. All local and regional authorities should be involved in promoting the citizen dialogue in a decentralised manner. We need to think of future generations. We should not think of future meetings or the next top jobs or the next treaty. Europe will have no future if our young generations do not have a future in Europe. The very high youth unemployment rate, segmented labour market, the difficulties for access to housing are creating obstacles for the future of our young generation. The largest threat to the future of Europe and to the prosperity of Europe is the ageing population. Those people who think that immigrants are a threat for a demographic balance are wrong. The demographic threat that we face today is our incapacity to guarantee for young people the possibility of being free to decide what they want to do with their lives. Now let me go back to Louis de Comminges, the poet. The third verse of his poem
is made of change. The European Union is not alone in the world and must not isolate itself. On the contrary, the EU must change to keep pace with the world. The strategic autonomy that we must pursue must be the autonomy of a Europe open to the world, diversifying our partners, defending multilateralism, standing up for our values and our standards. We must, therefore, take the lead in the major causes of humanity in our century. If Europe wants to be global, it cannot be confined to its continental dimension. The Portuguese presidency will propose that we work within the European Union on a global agenda for the oceans 2050. The oceans are a common heritage of humanity. The oceans are the most important climate regulator. The oceans need urgent protection, and the oceans are an immense source of biodiversity and resources. Others have given priority to the moon or to Mars. But Europe must embrace oceans as a cause and our great mission for the next decade. Because the oceans cover the largest area of our planet, but remain a great unknown. We have used the oceans as a bridge between continents and peoples, to trade, to develop knowledge, but we have forgotten the immense territory that remains to discover in the oceans themselves. It's this unknown that we want to discover, to preserve and value. We must say, rewarding President Kennedy in 1962, we choose to go to the oceans. E aqui.
And now let's move on to the fourth and final verse of Camões's poem. We always need to develop new qualities, more than just a common currency, a customs union or a single currency. Europe has been and will remain a community of values. It's a space with a unique social model. We have protection and provide equality of opportunity for all. This is something that where there's no concessions. The future of Europe should be built on the fundamental values of freedom, democracy, human rights, civil rights, and economic and social rights. We will only be able to conserve our identity if we add new qualities. We need to build on the opportunities that we have ahead of us. We started this journey 71 years ago with coal and steel, the basis of the economy at the time. Now we need to begin once again in green and digital, the drivers of recovery plans for the future. I'd like to conclude with a quote from Mário Soares, father of Portuguese democracy and an ardent European and a former MEP in this very chamber. In 1976, he highlighted or alerted us of the problem, which is very current. Building Europe is not going to be an easy task. There's going to be many obstacles which will be in our way, and some of them will be born from traditions which are linked to collective lives of different peoples. Rethinking Europe and thinking of its future is an ongoing obligation. This should be assumed with humility, faced with the historic importance of the aims, and it should be a task for all Europeans. That's why, rather than looking for change, European citizens need to be those who create this change and build this change. And I'd like to give my final words to the people of Europe, to those of you present here today and the thousands who are connected online. This conference is open. Is open so that all of you can participate in it.
Heard. Présentez.
Come forward with your priorities, your dreams, so that together we can build the future of Europe. Thank you very much.
Obrigado. Merci. Thank you, Mr. President, for this speech in 3 languages of the EU. Et vous parlez le français, d'ailleurs, comme tous ceux qui sont...
You speak French like all those on this panel do, and multilingualism is a feature of all of those who will be joining us today. Europe understands itself better. It speaks many languages. So now our next guest is Renaud Capuçon, a star violinist. He is a soloist who has played with many orchestras. He hasn't had many concerts during the last pandemic, as has been the case for many artists, and so we've seen him playing in supermarkets, for example. You may well have seen him while you were shopping. But he's here.
Capuçon recorded an extensive set of discs covering a wide range of music, from Bartók over others to film music even. Renaud Capuçon will play for us Méditation de Thaïs from an opera by the French composer Jules Massenet. It's a story about the lures of a life of pleasure and luxury in contrast with a more spiritual life. Enjoy. a breath of fresh air, soul food. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an interesting point in time. European debates got closer to home over the past few years, whether it's about the vaccine strategy or green passports to allow us to travel this summer, whether it is about the freedom of speech or social justice or climate change. The EU has a role to play, and the impact or lack thereof on each of our lives fuels the discussions from north to south, from east to west, and vice versa. The next speaker is bound to invite you to lean in, to get a seat at the table, to make your voice heard. Madam President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président,
President Macron, Mr. President Sassoli, Prime Minister Costa, ladies and gentlemen, dear European citizens, I am delighted to finally be back here in Strasbourg for what is a very special Europe Day. This city symbolizes a major chunk of our history. It is only normal, therefore, that we should be here to speak about our future. And when I think of this future and of this conference, I am reminded of a former Strasbourg resident, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and particularly his book, The Earth of Men, published just before the Second World War. In his unique and poetic style, he gave life to the emotions of fear and pain, love and hope that live in each and every one of us. He reminds us of the importance of living alongside one another, but also alongside the natural world that surrounds us, and our duty to hand over a better world to our children. Although the backdrop today is different, what he says to us rings true for today's world. There's a particular quote that resonates for me because it represents what Europe is about and the duty of this conference, and I quote, "To love one another is not about gazing into each other's eyes. It is about looking together in the same direction."
ladies and gentlemen, this is the task and the opportunity ahead of all of us. The conference is for all Europeans to debate a shared vision of what we want of our union. Of course, I'm conscious that there's always skepticism and cynicism wherever Europe debates its future or launches a project of this nature. So we must ensure it is not an intellectual policy exercise or a closed political compromise. We should be honest that the conference is not a panacea or a solution to every problem. And we must listen to all voices, whether critical or complementary, and ensure that we properly follow up on whatever is agreed. But I do believe that this conference is a real opportunity to bring Europeans together and to rally around a common ambition for our future, just as previous generations did. And we should also not underestimate the power of good that it could do for people individually and for society as a whole. The point is that the European Union must be whatever Europeans want it to be. Of course, the start of the conference is not the time to predict or prescribe outcomes. But there are certain dichotomies and issues that we should attempt to resolve. For example, some feel Europe is too close and too involved in their lives. And for others, it is far too far away and too remote and too detached. This is an opportunity for Europeans to help find the right balance. For some, Europe is too institutional and mechanical in the way that it works. This is an opportunity to see how we can simplify and make it more down to earth where it is needed. For some, the narrative of peace is not as compelling as for others. This is an opportunity to help build a new common purpose for all Europeans. We see how important that is when we look at the world around us. Globalized, but fragmented, full of contradictions and confrontations. It reminds us of the importance of a shared sense of purpose and that none of us can go it alone. The pandemic has been traumatic for people in Europe and around the world. It will be a formative part of so many lives and of so many parts of society. And like all trauma, we need to find a way to talk about it if we want to move beyond it. And there is no better way to do that than by offering perspective, hope, and the ability to change things for the better. And this is why I believe it is such an important moment for young people in particular to have their say. This pandemic stole more than a year from them. It stole experiences and emotions that every young person needs. It stole fun and friendship that shape people forever. It stole opportunities from them to grow, to learn, and to take risks. And more than anything, it made so many people, old or young, feel anxious, lonely, and simply less in control of their lives and their future. For the first time in a generation, more people worry that their children will not be better off than them. This shows that we need a new form of solidarity and social justice between generations. Es geht Gerechtigkeit.
This is about justice and rights, not only within our current society, but across the generations. The recent groundbreaking court rulings in several member states reflect this. They talk about the responsibility to take clear action to address our over-exploitation of nature and the environment. We can't give young people back the time that has been taken away from them by the pandemic. But we can rebuild better and in a fairer manner for and with them. We need to act now, and young people must play a central role in this change. The challenge, is a major one. Paradoxically, an awful lot needs to change so that the conditions for human life remain the same. Fundamental changes are needed to ensure that the next generations can still enjoy nature. We need to change so that our grandchildren can still experience spring, summer, autumn and winter. But fundamental change does not come about via court rulings, but via politics. And that's why I believe we should use this conference in order to hold a genuine structured dialogue between the generations, so that we can discuss how we can protect the fundamental conditions needed for life. There is as much at stake as there was in 1950, when Schuman made his declaration. At the time, he was looking at the desolation and destruction caused by war. But let's not kid ourselves. There is just as much at stake now, because climate change can rapidly produce the same destructive effects as a war.
On this is that Europe has always been at its best when it is reverse engineered. We are at our boldest when we first set an ambitious goal or have to act out of necessity, often without competence or precedence. This is the Europe that rises to the challenge, the Europe that just does it because it needs to be done. It is not so long ago that the environment was a fringe or a peripheral issue for the European Union. But it is now the most central issue for our generation and for the generations to come. Mesdames et messieurs, l'exemple.
Ladies and gentlemen, showing the example, showing empathy towards young people since the beginning of the pandemic is a source of inspiration to us, giving us hope and a sense of responsibility that we need to build a better world. It was just barely a month ago that I got a very, very emotional reminder of that when I became a grandmother for the very first time. The first caress with my young granddaughter was one of those moments that really, really allows you to get your priorities right and reminds you of what really matters in life. During that moment of tenderness, of love, she showed me one thing, that we must never forget, that we always owe it to the world to allow them to believe in the world, and we are old enough to make that difference happen. This is what brings generations together. Holding this little creature in my arms, I did what all new parents and new grandparents do, and always have done. I thought of all of the opportunities, and I tried to imagine the kind of world that she would grow up in. Would there be forests? Will there be any fauna left? Or maybe it will only be remaining in history books or films. What will jobs look like? What about technology that she will need? And inequalities and social disparity, will they be worse or better? And what will Europe do? What will she defend in her life? Will she be respectful, more diversified, more united, or will she be divided as often we were in the past? These matters may seem too large or too distant, whereas there are so many immediate challenges. However, the course of our action will determine the answers that we will be looking for tomorrow, and that's precisely why we need this conference and why we need to get it started now. We will tackle this task with humility, recognizing that not everything is ideal, but also with a real sense of pride, knowing where we're coming from and the conviction of what must be done at all times. And I will conclude where I started, with Antoine de Saint-Exupéry once again, because he inspired Jean Monnet with his sentence. The most beautiful profession a man can have is that of bringing men together. It's up to us now to keep on doing that. Thank you. Long live Europe.
Dankeschön. Danke sehr, Frau Präsidentin.
Thank you very much, President. The 430 million Europeans have been in lockdown now for a year to address the effects of a virus that has had a massive impact on people's daily lives, jobs, transport, their mood, of course, and now they can draw the lessons from this unprecedented event. They can see what will happen in terms of the economy and also perhaps in terms of philosophy.
Indeed, because admit it, so far there has been a lot of talk about European citizens. People on stage have been talking to you, but it's high time to draw you in and let's hear from what you have to say. So let's listen to some of you.
Ich bin geboren 1940.
I was born in 1940. So for me, the European Union is important and indispensable as a guarantor of peace. My hope for the future of Europe is that Europe can play its role in the world sustainably and efficiently.
My hope for the future of Europe is that at a central level, all decisions, whether political or economic, will be guided by ecology and the environment.
I think that the European Union should focus more on innovation in order to address global challenges, and not just technological innovation, but also social innovation, because the real magic happens at the interface between social and technological innovation.
This inability to naturally innovate, to promote creativity in important areas like digitization, big tech and so on, will hold the European Union back, both economically and politically. It needs to find ways to give these companies space to allow startups to grow and become global competitors.
I hope that my children will live in a country and in a Europe that respects their life choices, their worldview, and I hope that Europe will defend the democratic values of the country where my children settle.
I would like an accessible Europe that is not just labeled accessible on paper, but actually become genuinely accessible, an inclusive Europe that takes people just as they are.
I think that to improve the European Union, we need to put more trust into young people, young foreigners and immigrants, because a lot of us come here to do great things, to achieve our dreams, and all we need is a little helping hand.
We always have many hopes and dreams for our children. I'm really happy that my kids now living in Europe, being a part of the European community, they have much more possibilities.
My hope for the future of Europe as a practicing pharmacist is to have a common health policy in face of pandemics or other threats which really benefit the citizens, and as healthcare providers we have the tools we concretely need on the ground.
Ladies and gentlemen, this conference on the future of Europe should lead to practical recommendations, suggestions and ideas for change in the European Union. And to make sure that all this work, your work and input will fall into the right ears and will be followed up upon, an executive board of the Conference on the Future of Europe has been installed, co-chaired by our next guests.
Alors, Guy Verhofstadt, vous êtes
Guy Verhofstadt, you're a member of the European Parliament, you're a former Belgian Prime Minister, and you are the co-president of the conference on the Parliament side. Ana Paula Zacarias is Minister for European Affairs in Portugal, who represents the Council as part of this trio. And then finally we have Dubravka Suica representing the European Commission, Commissioner responsible for demography. Europeans wanted to ask you questions, very brief, direct question, and we're going to begin with Adas Salomon, who is a film director. She's 52, she comes from Romania, and she's going to ask you a question on a Europe of culture or European culture. Please listen to her question, Mr. Verhofstadt.
How can we have a true European culture?
Yeah, that was a very short question. Eh?
Very.
No, I think that, look, climate change was never a competence of the European Union. It became a competence of the European Union. Health was not a competence of the European Union. Because of COVID, it became a competence of the European Union. And I think that culture could also be a competence of the European Union. Arts, culture, education, youth. So for me, it exists. When I listen to or I read Goethe, for me that's not a German philosopher. For me that's a European philosopher and thinker. Or Voltaire and the Enlightenment. Or the same when I go to Strasbourg or to Firenze, President Sassoli. I feel myself in a European city more than in an Italian city or something like that. So I think that we have to put that in action. Until now we don't do it. And also because it has to do with our emotions. And that can be in small things, not only big things, but also small things. For example, our banknotes from the euro that are these drownings that are purely theoretical bridges. Why not putting our beautiful European monuments, the Notre Dame, the Ponte Vecchio, on our banknotes? Or, for example, another thing, we go to the Olympic Games all together. Why not our athletes, in their outfit, having here the national flag? Why not their European flag? It's in small things, but these small things count, certainly for the generations in the future. So culture needs to be in the heart of our project, because it's the most solid basis, I should say, of the European Union.
Thank you very much for that answer. Ms. Zacarias, the next question is directed at you. It's Maina Jabiol-Leguerre, a French high school student of 16 years old, who wants to know how you feel about climate change and, moreover, what you will do about it. Let's hear her say that.
What are you doing to maintain the health of the planet for our generation?
I think it's a question that many, many young people across Europe have in mind, top of mind. So what's your answer to them?
Absolutely. This is a simple question that has a complex answer. And that's why we're here. That's why we need all of us to answer to that incredible, simple question. What are we going to do about the health of our planet? What are we going to do about our health? Because they are together, hand in hand. And this is the way we need to look at things. Our health is dependent on our planet's health. And here I would say three things. Basically, climate change. We need to address this issue. It's fundamental. It's a lifeline that we have. So the European Union has been at the forefront of this. We established climate neutrality for 2050, and we have the first climate law, with the binding elements. So we want to achieve in 2030 at least a reduction in 55% of our carbon emissions. Then we need to look at oceans, like my Prime Minister just said. Oceans are fundamental. They are the essence of life. So we need to do more about the oceans. Then we need to look and do more about energy efficiency, and we are doing that. And we are also doing more about renewable energies. And there are other elements, biodiversity. We thrive in the world because it's biodiverse. This is a fundamental issue, and we are now having very soon an international conference on this. The world has to come together. It's not just the Union, it's the world that has to come together to promote biodiversity, fight against deforestation. And finally, another word that comes into this equation, needs. What do we need? How many T-shirts do we need? For what? So the patterns of consumption are a very fundamental element in all this. And it is important to see the cycles of production. It is very important to see design. How are we going to use these products? Resources are limited and they need to be better distributed. So these are the fundamental elements that we have to look into. Institutions, member states, but also the citizens. They need to be in the driving seat so that we know what to do. Please tell us what would be the main challenges that you see in this context. Difficult and complex answers needs everybody to build them.
Thank you very much.
Alors, Madame Suiza.
Mrs. Suiza, now a question from Anna Anderson. She's a 39-year-old business woman who comes from Latvia, and she is a member of the board of Riga Tech Girls, so a female entrepreneur, but she's very interested in issues that relate to diversity, which I'm sure you'll be interested in as well, because your portfolio, which relates to democracy, also depends on diversity. Let's hear the question.
Kā Eiropa var veicināt?
How can Europe promote diversity considering the unavoidable immigration, different cultures, and an aging society?
Thank you. I want to thank Anna for this question. What a better place than Strasbourg to show that Europe is promoting diversity, having in mind the history of Strasbourg and history of these two states. Diversity is, united in diversity is our European motto. So it's not only motto, but we live in diversity. And when mentioning immigration, I want to remind all of you that all of us are strangers somewhere in the world, either strangers or foreigners. Once, wherever you go, you will be somewhere in one part of the world stranger. So Europe is open. Europe wants to be open. We want to have open doors because we think that we have to help people who have to flee from violence or from other reasons. So definitely we are on this. The question is okay, and I think we are promoting this. I saw that also solidarity is very important because we heard a lot from our four presidents, so maybe to mention once again, intergenerational solidarity is very important because we have to learn. We have many young people here today, and it's very good. And 1/3 of all our panels will have to be comprised of 1/3 of young people from 16 to 25. But we have also to listen to older people because older people have wisdom, older people have experience, and we have also to listen to them. So intergenerational solidarity, I think, is one of our goals, and I'm sure that all of you, both young and older people, will engage in this conference because citizens' engagement is for us ultimate goal. We want citizens to be in the heart of this process, of course, alongside with institutions, but we need citizens to listen to them, to see what are their ideas, and to try to comply with their ideas, because sometimes there is a small gap between us policymakers and citizens. So we want to narrow this gap, we want to come closer, and this is the very idea of this conference. And I want to thank all of you for your speeches because everything has already been said.
Okay, next question is for you, Mr. Verhofstadt, from Martina Petrinjak. She's an architect and a bookshop owner in Croatia somewhere. She's in her 50s.
Croatia.
And she has a question for you regarding something that I know is close to your heart, freedom of expression and the freedom to be who you really are. This is something not only at stake in relation to other parts of the world, but also within Europe, of course. Let's hear how she puts it.
What does the European Union do in order to enlarge freedoms and values to the rest of the world where these values do not exist? What about those who fight for such freedoms?
I think we need to recognize that as things stand today, freedom of expression and the liberal democracy and everything that stands for, human rights, is becoming more of an obvious issue in the world. The major powers are sometimes saying the mirror opposite, and that we need to look towards the European model when it comes to what's happening currently in China. The democracy of millions of people in Hong Kong going to be totally smashed because of the regime of the Communist Party in China. Look at what's happening. It's the same thing in Russia. I increasingly think that it's a police state, without even for journalists any possibility of doing their job. I mean, it's no longer something that just happens. And the President of the Commission said it, we play a geopolitical role, defending our ideals, and I think there will be a need to try a bit harder. And I want to hear from the citizens, because it's all about the citizens. Are they prepared to take that step, to make that effort to defend our values, not just within? There are also other things to say, but of course I don't want to upset our sense of celebration. But when there are sanctions that need to be taken against Mr. Putin or against his oligarchs, or, well, we don't get unanimity, we need to drop it because otherwise it will take months. Or to have a free trade agreement with countries that don't respect our values blatantly. And, well, to dream just a bit about the possibility of one day having a European army, a long-standing project. Mr. Schuman, that was one of his ideas. It's not we that pulled it out of a hat. He's the one who came up with it. And currently, we're seeing the most gigantic wastage in Europe when it comes to military expenditure. To give you some figures, the same thing as the Chinese spend on their military, the same thing as Europeans, we spend 4 times more than the Russians in military expenditure. And I hardly think that if Russia comes, that we'd be able to stop them. Certainly not with the Americans, surely. But we need to tackle these points and to come up with answers. We need to put these questions to the citizens. Are we prepared to make that effort, this leap into the future that we haven't made in the past, it must be said? Well, somebody needs to recognize that reality.
Some people shaking their heads, no, 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 and others, yes, yes, okay. Yes, out there.
That was the goal.
Behind their screen. So I think you've sparked a debate, Mr. Verhofstadt. Thank you for that.
We keep going with the debate, Mrs. Vice President of the European Commission. There is a journalism student of 20 from the Netherlands who wants to ask you about an important value of the EU, that is transparency, Thijs. And let's have a listen to what he wants to ask.
Hoe zorgt u ervoor dat toekomstige generaties...
How can you make sure that future generations will have a better operating, more transparent and more democratic European Union?
So I want to thank for this question. The 3 principles of this conference are openness, inclusiveness and transparency. So we want to lead this process in a really open and transparent way. But regarding future and future generations, I already said we are preparing this Europe for future generations. So we don't want to talk about them. we want without them. So we want to talk about Europe with them. And this is the most important for this conference, because we want to include them and to talk with them about their future. When you think about Recovery and Resilience Facility, for example, we call it popularly Next Generation EU, which means we are preparing this Europe for next generation, but together with them, together with young people. Yes, strong Europe in the world is important, but this pandemic reminds us of daily issues, first of health, then of how we relate to our nature, what you, President von der Leyen, said, then how we relate to our family members, and how we work together. So this is something which we want our citizens to interact with us, to deliberate on daily issues, on what matters to their lives. I think this, I cannot preempt what will the results of the conference be, but I think the citizens will be interested in the issues that matter to them. Of course, institutional matters are also important, but I think this will be, but I don't want to say more about this because we don't want to influence the final result of the conference. Let's see. But anyway, what is the most important, what is the benchmark of this conference in comparison to previous conferences, citizens' dialogues, conventions, is feedback mechanism and follow-up. This is the reason why we will finish our deliberations by spring next year, and then we need second part of our mandate to follow up, to act accordingly. And this is what differs and what makes this conference, I hope, a success. But if we do this together, I hope we will have a success in the end. But let's see, and let's not impose anything on our citizens. Let them talk and let us listen a little bit.
Okay, thank you very much. It has been mentioned a couple of times throughout the event, Ms. Zacharias, youngsters, young people are at the center of this debate. It's about their future, so to speak. Let's listen to what 6 Portuguese students say about how they feel and think about the EU.
The fact that people shouldn't have to be all the same, we're different, and that is a good thing. Right now it's also about managing the pandemic, mainly the growing divergences between countries. The challenges that the community faces remain related to preventing climate change. If I could create a European project, I would probably work in education. Most of the time schools are not enough. They can teach us languages and mathematics, but they fail to teach us about being a good citizen. A project that could reach as many children as we can, and that could give us a chance to interact with each other in a way that we can all experience each other's cultures.
Ms. Zacharias, these are youngsters wanting to work together, wanting to learn more about each other, but I also noticed they're worried about the divergence and the growing apart among member states. What do you say to them?
These young Portuguese students are mentioning many areas. Above all, they are asking us to look at diversity and to see diversity as something positive. The motto of the European Union is united in diversity. Diversity is positive. It brings us greater capacity, greater adaptability, greater flexibility. This diversity is extremely important. It helps us to welcome migrants, to welcome those who are excluded, and to ensure that we're leaving no one behind. They have also spoken about multiculturalism. They've spoken about education. They've also spoken about something which is very important, the importance of having in schools information about Europe. So young people in schools can work on issues around Europe, so they can discuss it, so they can have a stage to bring forward their ideas, not just in this conference on the future of Europe, but on a daily basis, so people know more about Europe and they can give us more feedback about Europe. I would say that they are right. We need to look for their future. I also agree with Dubravka. Says that we can't forget the older people as well. We can't forget that people have had difficult lives. We can't forget those who have been excluded, those who are different. We also need to take those into consideration, and those who don't have internet, so they can't log on to this. I think we need to welcome and take in all of these ideas. We need to work on them, and that's what the conference is here for. And that, the future is in your hands.
Merci à tous les trois de cet éclairage.
Thank you to all three of you for these responses.
Nous sommes arrivés à la fin de.
This brings us to the conclusion of this event in Strasbourg. Thank you to President Macron, President Sassoli, Prime Minister Costa, Commissioner von der Leyen, and thank you for having come here and launched this conference on the future.
To you too, of course, the three co-chairs of the executive board of the conference, Guy Verhofstadt, Dubravka Šuica and Anna Maria Zacharias. And thanks to everyone out there, you look brilliant on the screens, to be honest. Very colorful, very involved. Thank you so much for watching this event. Yeah, an applause to you via the screens. You look brilliant.
Alors, pour participer, il vous faut accéder à la plateforme.
So to take part, you have to go onto the platform futureeurope.eu, and we're going to conclude with some music, the Anthem of Europe. This is a very popular Spanish version by Miguel Rios, who has recruited various people from the world of culture, well-known sports personalities. You may well recognise some of them. So this is the Ode to Joy revisited by Claude. So this will conclude this ceremony, but will open the page to your active participation in the European construction.